Yes, welcome to the webinar. I'm going to be giving the presentation today, so I'll introduce myself. So I'm Ed Melick. I am the Director of Business Development and Collaboration with the Center for Applied AI, which is part of UMBC Training Centers. I also do work with a group called AI and Faith, and I am a contributing fellow there, and I also co-lead the media and technology team there. And I'm learning a lot of stuff about AI and ethics in that role, which I'm going to share with people during this presentation. Before I get going, just a quick introduction to the Center for Applied AI. Again, it's part of the UMBC Training Centers. We are a DC, Baltimore-based local nonprofit. We provide professional training services in technology, innovation, leadership, program management. We do that for individuals. We do it for organizations. Some of our clients include organizations like the NSA, Department of Energy, U.S. Cyber Command, or I should say Army Cyber Command, T. Rowe Price, many, many organizations. We're very focused on instructor-led training and applied learning. So if you take one of our certification classes, you're going to do some work and you're going to be much more likely to pass the certification when you do classes with us. We do off-the-shelf type training, we do customized training and everything in between. So just a quick sales pitch for the Center for Applied AI and UMBC Training Centers. And now I can get going with the presentations. So today we're going to be talking about AI and ethics. I wanted to kick this off and kind of talk about a personal experience I had about 6 years ago. My ex-wife was battling pancreatic cancer at the time. She had been through about 19 months of chemotherapy and treatments, and it was apparent that she was near the end of life, and she wanted to try one more thing to try to save her life. And the thing that she chose was cannabis. And at the time, we were both living in Virginia, and cannabis was completely illegal. And I really went through a lot of angst trying to decide what to do. I know this is, we were basically trying to save someone's life, but we were going to be doing it with an illegal drug. And that just really captures the sort of ethical dilemmas we face all the time. This was a much more serious one, of course. But I put a lot of thought into this, a lot of prayer, talked to various people and pastors, and I'd be happy at the end of the presentation to share a little more about what happened. But it's a good example of a question we might encounter in our lives. Other questions are on the sheet here. Is it wrong to steal food in order to feed your family if you're starving? Is it wrong to lie on your resume in order to get a job that you're going to do really well once you get it? And on a lighter note, is it wrong to exaggerate on your online dating profile? I once heard a comedian say that every dating profile picture should be a picture of the person standing naked on a scale holding a bank statement. I thought that was hilarious. This whole discussion of ethics cuts into the topic of the promise of AI versus the peril. I've heard this a lot. I know the president mentioned this in his executive order. The promise of AI is what it can do, all the wonderful things it can do. And the peril is, what it should do and what it shouldn't do. And the challenge that we have is, how do we regulate AI without stifling innovation? So I've got just a few samples of responsible AI. I think we've all probably played around with some of the chatbots. I use chatbots constantly throughout the workday to do research, to ask questions. It really speeds up my work. There's some amazing apps out there. Language translation, you can go to the HeyGen app. You can film a video of yourself and then have it redone with a different language and with your lips moving appropriately. It's just an amazing application. Many other things listed here. I think healthcare is probably the thing that's most impressive right now. There are apps called Mirai and Sybil that do predictive cancer models. Mirai has an incredible accuracy, 75 to 85% predicting breast cancer occurrence in the next 5 years. Sybil is even more accurate for lung cancer prediction. And then there's applications like AlphaFold, which is a protein research AI platform that's really accelerating drug discovery. Another thing I stumbled across the other day was there's this big machine that goes through the fields and it zaps weeds. It can using AI determine what is the crop and what is a weed, and it zaps the weeds without using any type of chemicals. And it's funny, I found it out through disinformation. Someone had posted it and said it kills bugs, but it doesn't kill the bees. So it's kind of funny. It was where I found it. And there's also forest fire prevention. There's many, many responsible AI applications that are wonderful. The problem, of course, is irresponsible AI. And I just listed a few things here. We're going to talk about 4 or 5 of these later on, but I just wanted to pop them up on the screen. So just for a moment, I thought I would share with you, what does AI say about ethics? And so I went to 4 different chatbots and I asked them, if you're talking to a 5-year-old, in one sentence, what is ethics? And I thought the best answer came from Anthropic's Claude. It said that ethics is thinking about what is right and wrong when deciding how to act. Very simple explanation. Really, it's all about decision making and trying to make good and right decisions that turn out to hurt, not to hurt people, but to help them and be a blessing on people. Gemini said something interesting. It said ethics is figuring out the right way to play together so everyone has fun and feels good. And why that kind of makes sense to a 5-year-old, some of the things that might make one person have fun and feel good might be quite offensive and harmful to another person. So this is kind of a nice little example of asking several chatbots to answer something and comparing the answers. I think most of us would agree that these sort of things like justice and honesty, equality, dignity, treating people fairly, these are things I think we've all kind of just come to accept in our society that are good and that our ethics and our morals should be based on. I think this is whether you're religious or whether you're atheist or whatever, these sort of have become the fabric of our society. Just a quick mention, there are people who are come at this from the faith perspective. They may be Christian or Muslim or something, and they have, their teachings that they base their moral code and their ethics on. I happen to be a Christian. I put a number of scriptures in here. We've all heard about the mighty flood of justice, which Martin Luther King talked about. Jesus talked about feeding the hungry, housing the stranger. These are things that, inform my decisions as I move forward and I do my work and I live my life. And there's an interesting book called The Air We Breathe. And it talks about how, Greek and Roman and Egyptian societies were not like this. This was not commonplace, and that, the Christian emergence of the Christian faith pushed these sort of things along. And these, in fact, have become sort of like just something we don't even notice anymore, that we take these things for granted. So why is this even an issue? And it's really because of 2 things. As humans, we all have the capacity for both good and bad. And this has been cited by people like Carl Jung, who is a well-known psychiatrist, and it's also in these holy books, the scriptures. In the Bible, Jeremiah says the human heart is the most deceitful of things. And we prove it every day by the way we behave. I love the above average effect. If you go to an emergency room and it's filled with people who just caused a car accident, and you survey them and ask them if they think they are, how they think they are at driving, they're all going to tell you they're above average drivers. If you go to a university and you ask professors how they are at teaching, they're all going to tell you they're above average teachers. And the same sort of thing we can experience if we go to our friends or our family members and we ask them to give us some sort of criticism. Notice how you react. You typically bristle and start to boil, and you want to tell them what's wrong with them instead of listening to that feedback. This is just in our nature. We can do both good and bad. Even worse, there are bad actors out there. There are sociopaths and narcissists and dictators, and they have no problem with doing harm to get some sort of a benefit from that. And when you're on a planet with 7.9 billion people, there's going to be a good number of bad actors. And so I'm not telling you all this to discourage you, but to simply say, we have to take that into account when we're putting in the guardrails and the scaffolding to guide the development and use of AI. We have to take this into consideration. So really the core problem about ethics and AI is getting AI models to capture our norms and values properly and to make sure they do the stuff we want them to do and don't do things we don't want them to do. So I'm going to dive in now. I wanted to give that sort of quick intro and talk about some current issues that are important right now. There was a recent paper published where a group of people came together and did a study, and they identified a whole bunch of ethical issues in the literature. And they came up with actually 378 of them, which is a lot. And they reduced it. They put those in 19 different buckets. And this bar chart basically shows those 19 buckets, and it lists them in descending order of mention. So the thing that was mentioned the most in the literature was the issue of bias and fairness. The second most often mentioned thing was the issue of safety. Then it was followed by toxicity and harmful content and so forth. So I'm going to jump through probably three, four, five of these in the next slides. One of the ones I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I'm actually moderating a disinformation, misinformation chat group at AI and Faith. We're also publishing a toolkit soon to help people kind of navigate the whole environment of misinformation, disinformation. Disinformation is when you're deliberately trying to deceive somebody. Misinformation is basically just getting the facts wrong. A great example I've heard of this is if I'm a CFO of a company and I intentionally publish inaccurate information in order to stoke the stock price, that is an example of disinformation. If I'm a stockholder in that company and I take that information and I share it with someone, I'm misinforming that. I'm not necessarily doing it intentionally. I don't know it's intentionally wrong, but I am misinforming people. This is a huge issue right now. We've got an election coming up in November. There are elections in the UK. As a matter of fact, this year, there are a lot of elections, and this is starting to pick up some steam. I think many of us have heard about the Biden robocall during the New Hampshire primaries. I've seen images of Donald Trump praying in a chapel, and he's got six fingers on his hands. We've seen photographs of three armed election workers. And people are posting this sort of stuff, and they're trying to get what they want. They're trying to tear down or build up their particular candidate or one they're against. And this is gonna pick up steam as we head into November. And then you add into this the fact that there are bad actors. There's one particular political operative who loves to boast about doing what he calls flooding the zone with BS. He says he has a technique where he just puts more and more information out there, and it's meant to confuse and create chaos. And then people like him come along and try to leverage that. And so we have to simply understand that folks like that are out there. Another person, an expert in AI, likened the battle against disinformation to a battlefield triage. There's just so much going on out there. You're trying to care for multiple people that have been injured at once in the midst of a battle. I wanted to include this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. He thinks this is such a big issue that perhaps the internet will simply be untrustable soon. And really what he's talking about is the World Wide Web, the pages that are out there and the information. But it's a very serious problem when you put this sort of power in individuals' hands that they can reach so many people so quickly. It's a challenge. Another issue is safety. There's many, many things that could happen with AI. AI, you can do harm to many more people much more quickly than you could before. So you could do something to our infrastructure. Maybe you someone knocks out a power grid in Northeast America during the winter, and suddenly people are literally freezing to death, and they can't get to power. Food can't be delivered. That's a big issue. People can ideate and plan biological agents development. There's lots of offensive and harmful images out there. We've heard about the Taylor Swift pornographic deepfake image. I'm reading lots of stories about boys, middle schoolers, creating nude images of their classmates. That's not a helpful thing for their classmates. And then there's really serious issues where people are using AI to sow doubt in previously trusted authorities. And this is a huge issue in the healthcare industry. There is so much pro-con information out there on social media and the web relating to vaccines, for example, that, frankly, it's maddening. You don't know what to believe and what to trust. Another issue right now, we've got fighting in Gaza. The situation there is awful. We have the war in Ukraine, which has eclipsed 2 years. We've actually had a lot of fighting in Ethiopia, and we're not hearing anything about that. That's the longest running conflict on the globe right now. And with warfare, AI can be used to do things that were unthought of before. And I think the worst part of that, there's Geneva Convention and a lot of rules for how you're supposed to fight warfare. I know it sounds absurd. It's like in the movie, there will be no fighting in the war room. AI has a dehumanizing effect. When you use tools like this, there's a lack of empathy that's introduced into the war environment. And I think the biggest issue here is autonomous weapons being given and able to use lethal force decisions. This is a very, very serious thing, and it's going to happen. There are certain bad actors that are going to do this one day. Some people see it positively. They say, hey, it's leveling the playing field. The Ukrainian drone attacks, AI-driven, have really decimated the Russian tank force. And so we look at that and we cheer that on. On the flip side of that, there's an increased asymmetry. Countries like America, Russia, China, who have deep pockets and can afford a lot more technology than other countries, there's an increasing gap between our capabilities to fight war and those other countries. Another issue is harmful biases. There's two big ones, gender biases and racial bias. I like to use the example of a picture database called Labeled Faces in the Wild. This was used commonly to train various large language models. When it first came out, 77% of the images were male, and we know that's not representative of the population. And it turns out that George Walker Bush, there were 2 times more images of him in the database than all the Black females in the entire database. So you use a model like that created by biased human beings, and of course the model is going to be biased, and it's not going to give the best results. And you could even see a sexism in some of the early word embeddings. If you were to type doctor minus man plus woman, the earlier models would say nurse. And we all know there's plenty of female doctors out there and there's plenty of male nurses, but this is the sort of thing that they're looking at over and over and they're trying to correct. But with the mystery of how these models operate, you can't fix everything. You can't catch everything. So the racial biases to me are really a problem. There's a system called Compass. It's an AI-driven system being used for judiciary risk assessment. So whether people are released pre-trial, what their bail amount is, what parole decisions are made. These are based on these models. And there have been a number of studies about their inaccuracies. ProPublica, I'm citing one here. They have all sorts of data in that particular study. In one case, they took very similar people, a white man and a Black man, and they gave the system gave a risk assessment of 3 on a scale of 10 to the white person and a score of 10 out of 10 to the Black person. And yet the white person was arrested 3 times later and the Black person was not arrested at all. So this just gives you some kind of an idea into the issues that can pop up with these sort of systems. And then the final one I wanted to mention was copyright and IP protections. This is a big deal. I have an artist for a daughter, and she's not happy with AI. I'm an author. I've written a few books. I mean, a lot of our materials are out there being used to train models, and people are not getting compensated for that, and they're not getting credit for that. And the biggest lawsuits that have been filed about this, the New York Times has sued OpenAI and Microsoft because their models were trained on tons and tons of data, articles and data from the New York Times without any credit, without any compensation. And so there's a lot of people looking at this right now to see how that case plays out. Will they compensate New York Times in a way that's satisfactory to them? Or will this, end in some way that makes everybody unhappy in some sense? So I kind of alluded to this a couple of times already, but I just wanted to mention this towards the end, is that AI is giving never seen before power to individuals. It used to be a day when you wanted to build a bridge or build a nuclear power plant or whatever, that had to be done by national governments, or a collection of wealthy people or investors had to come together and do that. But that's no longer the case with AI. A single person with their own personal motivations can take some sort of an AI tool and reach out across the globe and have an impact. These tools are available to everyone. They are amazingly powerful and they're becoming amazingly commonplace. And in most cases, they're free. And this is a big deal. And so this quote I put in here is from Mustafa Suleyman, who is the co-founder of DeepMind. They were founded in 2010. He's a real expert at artificial intelligence, and DeepMind was sold to Google back in 2014. He is very concerned. And there's a woman who wrote a Medium article about him, and she reviewed his book, The Coming Wave. And some people believe right now that you simply can't contain it already. It's just gotten the horses out of the barn, and the best we can do is somehow manage it as best as possible. And the main reason for this is that there's just an arms race right now. I got to give Google credit. In the early days when they were developing AI, they were trying to take a measured approach. But when Midjourney came out and ChatGPT came out and everyone started using them like crazy, Google sort of laid aside its restraints and started running fast as well. And several other companies came on the scene. And now we have people like Sam Altman at OpenAI talking about raising hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions, to fund the build out of infrastructure. And you can see that the pace of development seems to be far outpacing the guardrails that are being put in place. Is nothing being done? Well, of course not. Yeah, plenty is being done. It's very fragmented, but a lot is being done. Here's just some examples of laws and regulations that have been passed. The EU is really the first sort of, nation state global type a law that was passed recently, their EU AI Act. Our White House issued an executive order on AI. A lot of state laws are being passed, in particular relating to non-consensual images. The FCC acted really quickly in response to the Biden call, and they said that those sort of calls, mimicking voices, violate the TCPA. There are technological solutions. I know all the model developers are monitoring and adjusting their models. Can they do it fast enough to keep pace with the development of the models? That remains to be seen. Organizations like DARPA are creating technologies like Semaphore and Guard. I think Glaze, the detection tool, came out of DARPA. And there's some clever things being done. There are people who are, there's something called an institutional review board that's being used in the medical industry. So if I'm a drug developer, I create an institutional review board of external people that are experts and are very diverse. And I give them the final say on things. Like if I'm developing and want to release a particular drug, they can assess the way it was developed, the data backing it, whatever, and they can put a stop to it if they choose to do so, if they see something that's inappropriate. People are suggesting that organizations, companies that are working in development of AI technologies create these sort of institutional review boards. And then, of course, there's just good old-fashioned defamation lawsuits. And I think we've seen a lot of these in play recently in the political realm. There are private grassroots efforts. There's partnership on AI. A lot of famous companies involved in that, like Capital One, Google, and OpenAI, and DeepMinds. There are wealthy people who are getting involved. There's a hedge fund manager who made billions named Paul Tudor Jones. He created a group called Just Capital, and he's trying to promote the development of just companies, people that are behaving justly. And he just came out with an AI initiative. Don't have a lot of data on it, but my point including it was everybody from different dimensions and angles is trying to address this problem. And then finally, I'll mention AI and faith, which is this pluralistic, faith-driven organization I'm involved in. We're trying to take the wisdom of these ancient major religions, whether it's the Muslim faith or Judaism or Hindu faith, and bring it to bear on the development and use of artificial intelligence. And that kind of brings me to closing out to talking what we can do personally and individually. And I thought I would mention something really interesting. I saw a documentary called Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies. And it was created in part by a guy named Dan Ariely. He's an honesty expert, a researcher down at Duke University. And he developed something called a matrix experiment. And when he applies it, it's highly accurate in determining who is cheating when taking a particular test. And he gave this to 40,000 people, over 40,000 people, and the numbers were ugly. Just under 70% of the people who took that test, over 40,000 people, cheated. And he went later on to UCLA and he had 500 students try to write the 10 Commandments down. The bad news is none of them could remember all of the 10 Commandments. The good news is nobody cheated. And he noticed that there was something about reminding people about a moral code before they went and did something had a profound effect on how they acted. He did some more experiments. He took self-professed atheists, had them swear on Bibles, and then take the test, and they didn't cheat. And then finally, he went to MIT, which does not have an honor code, and to Princeton, which does have one. And he divided groups of subjects into two groups. One group at each school signed a statement saying they would honor their honor code. And in fact, MIT didn't even have one. And the other group did not sign anything. And what happened? There was perfect correlation. The folks who signed some sort of statement simply saying, yes, I will honor the honor code, even though they didn't even have one at MIT, did not cheat. And the other people did cheat. And I find this fascinating. And so what I'm going to ask you all to do, whoever's on this call, is to at least check yourself. Give yourself constant reminders of your moral code, your moral fiber, your ethics, whatever that framework. If you're religious and you're praying each morning, check yourself. If whatever you are, whatever your background is, try to put some sort of a framework together. And as you move forward in your job, and in particular relating to AI, ask yourself, am I using this right? Am I using it for good purposes? Am I trying to help people, or could it cause harm? I think that's really a very important thing we can do. And as we do that and we change, we can give other people reminders, encourage other people to do the same, because it hopefully could have some sort of an exponential effect. And I've heard many experts talk about massive social changes around the globe over the years, and they typically happen from the ground up, from individuals changing, then collectively getting together and exerting influence to change. Another thing I wanted to mention is simply slow down. If you read something online and it makes you bristle and ticks you off, don't immediately respond to it. Just check yourself, hold off, do a little bit of research, and just take your time in responding. And the final thing I would challenge you to do is to get out of your echo chamber. I can't tell you how many people I see in videos saying, yeah, I did my research, but they were doing it inside of an echo chamber. We need to cross boundaries and get out and look elsewhere. So I'm going to say, if anybody wants me for future Lunchbox webinars to focus on a particular topic, if you, for example, want me to drill down on disinformation, put it in the chat, give me suggestions. I'd be happy to do that. That's an area, again, I'm focusing on this particular from March through April. We're having sort of a focus on that in AI and faith. So I'm developing a bit of materials on that. I do also want to mention that next week we're not having a lunchbox gathering because we're having an in-person meetup in Columbia, Maryland. So if anyone wants to join us for that, that's I think it's at 5 or 5:30, Tom, next April the 11th.
Yeah, 5 o'clock.
And then we have another lunchbox scheduled for the 18th, which is going to be focusing on co-pilot productivity. And also, I'm going to try to put some information. I've got a bunch of sites here that are sort of for educational purposes and fact checking and other things. I'm just going to stick these on our Slack group. We have an AI and ethics subgroup on our Slack page, and that'll be there for folks. So, hey, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Maybe I'll leave this up here if some people want to take a screenshot of this and go look at some of these sites. How did I do time-wise, Tom?
It was excellent and excellent job. I have a couple of comments and yeah, mostly comments and a recommendation. First of all, you had mentioned you talked about Mustafa Suleiman when he was at DeepMind. You gave a quote there, and he just recently, a week or two ago, he left Inflection AI, and Inflection AI was really a personal assistant. I think he was really interested in sort of helping people by just having conversations, almost like a therapist. That's what Inflection did. But he left there a week or two ago, and he's now the VP, the EVP actually, and CEO of a new division in Microsoft called Microsoft AI. So
Wow.
that's kind of an interesting update on Suleiman from originally, from DeepMind. Also, you had mentioned some of the hallucinations and just biases, et cetera. Most importantly, I think relative to the biases, it was I don't know if people knew, about a month ago, not long after Google Gemini was released, less than a week later, they had to pull the image generation part of Gemini because of biases in the generated images. They are slowly bringing that back, but I don't think it's back to where eventually Google Gemini will be. And the final point I wanted to make.
Tom, I want to add something to that. I was at the Potomac Officers Club for a big AI summit. They had, just the DARPA leads and CIO of CIA, and the message was, one thing was I heard about just the importance of training over and over, but the other thing was, hey, we're not going to use this AI in as much as we think we are. It's going to be used far less. And we really got to slow the roll again and see how these systems operate. So, and they were talking about just taking it one use case at a time. This whole craziness of just applying it to everything, that's not what's happening. People are realizing this is not a trivial thing, and there are lots of hallucinations and biases.
Yeah, well, thanks. So the last point I wanted to make, it's more of a recommendation for those of you that are still online. I strongly recommend this week, there is a famous podcaster affiliated with the New York Times. I think it's Ezra Klein. Anyway, that's where I listen to him. But Ezra Klein is a pretty popular podcaster. And he interviewed Ethan Melick, not to be confused with Ed Melick. Ethan Melick, who's a professor at University of Pennsylvania and is doing some really cool stuff around AI and talks about the benefits, the things you need to be you you need to be aware of, the ethics aspects. But one of the things he said that I really liked is that he likes to view AI as another person on a team of
Hmm.
on a team, of people that you wouldn't, if you're on a team at work, everybody kind of checks one another's work. And that's what he kind of said is, hey, just view AI as another team member. You can believe some of it, but you're going to check the work that that team member does. So
Hmm.
I'll put that in the chat if we didn't already get in there. But Ezra Klein and Ethan Malick at Penn I recommend that. So I'll stop talking there, Ed. So back to you.
Yeah, so I can take this screen off now. I don't know. I'm hesitating looking at the chat because I don't want to. I'm doing a stop screen, so I'm going to stop my screen share and go back here. I don't know if there are any chat things in here, any questions or whatever, but otherwise we could just let people go if there's. Let me see. I'm looking at the chat now. All right.
All looks good there.
Okay. Good.
Well, great. Well, hey, Ed, thanks a million.
Types of Snoops. So thank you. I was thinking of Snoop Dogg, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Um,
great.
and thanks to everyone for spending your time this afternoon with us. Ed, thank you very much for what I just thought this was a great talk. Really appreciate it. And we're gonna have you back on again.
Yeah, definitely do that. And again, any suggestions you all have, let me know.
Great. Thank you everyone for attending
Thanks.
and have a great day.
All right. Take care all.